Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Environmental Coffee House. I'm Sandy Shellis, and tonight, guys, Lyle Lewis is returning, and he is an esteemed guest, author of Racing to Extinction, and so many accolades we could give him for his experience in life. There's nothing like experience, Lyle. You've got it. You've got something very few of us absolutely have, which is hands on, out in the wilderness, working with animals, wildlife, taking care of Mother Nature. So, welcome, everybody, and welcome, Lyle.
Thank you.
You're welcome. How you been?
Good.
What you been doing? Besides
Well,
commiserating on Twitter with everybody.
I actually haven't been able to get out a little bit.
Good.
I actually had a really good wildlife viewing day earlier this week. Met some biologist friends and we saw some condors and sea otters and
Oh,
turkeys and deer and nesting bald eagles all on the same day.
that's
So that was
all in the same day. Oh my God. That's
pretty
great.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's nice. You should send me pictures sometime. I have other friends that send me pictures. I love to see everyone's pictures of their gardens or wildlife. It's something that just is thrilling for all of us. So, you know what? Before we go on, let me say hi to everybody. Kristen and Honey Bunny, thank you, Kim, for moderating. Jean, thank you for moderating. Teddy, it's really great to see all of you. Christopher, really quickly, I just want to give you a couple of things. If you have questions, put a Q. I'm going to try to do, we might do questions early because in our collapse degrowth conversation, Lyle wants to tie it all up. We're going to tie it up in the second part of the show. So we're doing it a little bit differently. And so, why don't you start us out on this flow of conversation, Lyle? And what,
Okay.
yeah, because you have a whole thing in your head that you wanted to get off your chest. So, here we go.
Well, in the course of dealing with social media and listening to many of the guests on your programs and some other programs, one of the things that I found was that there's there's kind of a dichotomy between collapse awareness or collapse acceptance and those people that aren't collapse aware or don't have any collapse acceptance and most people think in those terms of that kind of clear dichotomy,
Mm-hmm.
but of a lot of the people that appear on your show and listen to your show, most of them are in some form of collapse aware or collapse acceptance, but there's little agreement on what that actually means. And I thought that it would be an interesting discussion to just go through some of those scenarios and talk about all of the different perspectives of different people and then I thought I would give my toward the after we've had kind of an initial discussion at the end, give you kind of an ecological, kind of an evolutionary e- ecological perspective and kind of a historical perspective on what my thoughts are in terms of what collapse actually means. And it's kind of like a journalism 101 class,
Oh
you've
boy.
got the what, when, where, why, and
The
how.
W's. I should write that down. The W's, yeah. Take my notes tonight,
and
teacher.
and so the what is fairly obvious, and that's we're talking about it today, and that's collapse.
Sure.
And the other part of the what is a lot of people talk about degrowth, and sometimes some people, for a lot of people, degrowth and collapse are one and the same, and for other people, they're completely separate. And so,
Yeah, I'd
so
say.
there's all these different intergrades of how people perceive what could potentially happen. So the what is the collapse? the when, you know, all we can really say is the when is soon. The who is complex life on Earth. The why is you cover this on a weekly basis, and so does everybody else. I mean, it covers the climate change, it covers sixth mass extinction, toxic chemicals, microplastics, nanoplastic,
Oh,
infectious
the
diseases,
cadre, a la carte. Put it all together. Yeah.
lack of clean water, lack of food, AI. I mean, the list of the whys is almost endless, which makes the and the where, of course, is good old planet Earth. So that means it's the how that people, you know, everybody has their own ideas about the how part of
Right.
the equation.
Right.
And because there's so many whys, there also makes for many, many hows. And so I thought today we could uh, just have a kind of a freestyle conversation on the how for a while. And then I can give you some perspectives from a historical and evolutionary perspective on why I think the how will be, you know, very onerous.
I think we're all going to want to hear this. I mean, all of us are in different places. I think it's not a cookie cutter. It's not a cookie cutter feeling or cookie cutter way or path. You know, we've had Karen on who took over for Michael Dowd's um, collapse acceptance. She's doing her thing, trying to help people feel more comfortable in that knowledge and live a life to the fullest you can. Then there's, you know, someone like me who, yes, I'm aware, I see the big picture, but I'm still feeling that no matter what, that there's some kind of activism that should be done, and everybody sees it all over my X page because I'm constantly involved in things and here even locally. So I know the big picture, but yet I feel like there's still some salvaging to do, right?
And I think the salvaging is just the moment. I mean,
Right.
we live for the present. If we can make our moments here better, last longer, then that's probably a success.
Be cleaner.
Uh,
Yes.
but uh, you know, I've dealt with enough people uh, that don't care, that you know are completely oblivious to the environment that supports their existence. That you know, I recognize that the people that are actually collapse aware and collapse and you know have accepted collapse are really a very small minority of the population as a whole, and always will be. Uh, Even when because I see collapse. I mean, there's zillions of scenarios for collapse, and it's made for all kinds of great novels, movies,
Oh my God.
conversations, and there's a limitless number of other um, potential collapse scenarios, but it'll probably be some form of social and economic that where the environmental costs and causes are somewhat hidden from most people. Obviously,
Well, in the United
uh,
States,
yeah, well, maybe not.
Canada.
And, you know, we're seeing these heat domes are manifesting themselves. And, you know, before the program, we talked a little bit about the one in India and uh, the cost to human life from those. So, you know, it's pretty hard to ignore heat as a potential a mortality factor when it's exerting its influence
To
directly.
to some people. And then there's people that just ignore it because it's too painful, or they want to ignore that there's anything outside beyond the United States, which is like I watch these old weather guys on. I watch a weather show. I love them. They're just wonderful meteorologists, but they're old timers. And if you talk about the words heat dome, or you talk about anything that's not weather related 30, 40 years ago, they flip out, or at least the one does. And he this week he did everything he could to bring up other heat waves that had happened in the United States for 2 and 3 days in different years, and said, see, he's really terrified, I think. I think that a lot of people are terrified, and they're holding on to every shred of, at least the older ones, holding on to every shred of sameness, that they can. They just can't deal
Absolutely.
with
And,
it.
and I think it's just a human trait that,
Yeah,
we cling to normalcy, and we hope that tomorrow will be the same as today, and to, that that was the same as yesterday, and that next week will be the same as this week, and that, we have certain expectations, and that's how most of humanity operates. And what I that's what I encounter when I'm talking about other people that are not collapse aware, or have
yeah.
have no intention of ever accepting collapse. Is, I think there's a certain amount of fear, but also change is so difficult for people, even in the best of times. But the
Got that
change
right.
that we're seeing, and the scale of the change that we're seeing, is pretty profound. And we're seeing all these inflation now, and really, when you have a finite planet and a finite amount of environmental resources, and you're adding 70 to 80 million people to the planet every year, it's a supply and demand. I mean, it's actually an economic,
Yeah, there you
it's
go.
a simple economic model of, you've got more demand and less supply, and the costs of everything are going to continue to go up just because of that alone. I mean, it's simple economics, and on it, but it's being paid for ecologically.
Overshoot. I should make
Overshoot.
overshoot. I should make a little overshoot overshoot. Just play it when those things come. Yeah, I think you're completely right. And you know the ecological costs. I see the ecological costs, but I didn't even upload them. I should have. I put them on Twitter today. My friend sent me pictures of the beautiful, pristine, gorgeous property near her in central New York, and how it's being destroyed for the solar farm. And
Yep,
I don't
I
know if
saw that.
you saw it, and it's just it hurts.
It does.
But there's
I
the
mean,
other people that don't think that's a bad thing, because we have to get off fossil fuels, so we have to do what we have to do no matter what the cost.
right, and all they're doing is just it's a shell game,
Yeah,
where
there you go.
they're just transferring the cost elsewhere, and those costs are going to mount and become just as great a threat as the original costs that they were trying to mitigate. And so, and that's what happens when you have 8 billion people on the planet. There, it's impossible to mitigate 8 billion people. It just is simply not possible. And so, um, and and I think we're in collapse. We're
Hell
we're
yes.
people just don't realize that we're in collapse, because the population is still being able to increase, but ecosystems have been and are collapsing everywhere, and we've actually got little tastes of it with things like COVID. Uh, where we have, one of the things that I think will Well, maybe back up just a little bit. You know,
Back up.
pe- people, in terms of collapse and the how is kind of, uh, the different scenarios, but the how much is also one aspect of the how. And for some people, it's just a gradual reduction in the population growth rate. I mean, I encounter that philosophy, and I think most people do on Twitter all the time.
Hmm.
For other people, collapse is leveling out the population. For others, is losing 2 billion, backing off to 6 billion and 4 billion and 2 billion and a half a
Yeah.
billion and all the way down to nothing. And so, uh, but with COVID, there's been 7 million people killed by COVID to date, and
7 million around the world?
7 million,
Wow.
yeah. And
Wow.
if you look at uh, the population gain, the global population gain in 2023 was 70 million. In 2022, it was 63 million. In 2021, it was 68 million. 2020 was 78 million. And 2019 was 82 million.
Okay, should I
And
do the
so,
math, Teach? I'm making the
so,
notes. Should I do the math? Okay.
so the anomaly of the 68 and the 63 million can, at least be
Yeah.
partially explained with COVID. But look what happened to our systems during COVID, where our healthcare system was completely overwhelmed in places, and we had huge supply chain disruptions. And, you know, I've read a number of uh, fictional novels about collapse, and a lot of them are very good. And the authors put a lot of thought in it, and obviously the best fiction is based on as much truth as they can put into it. And there's books like The Stand by Stephen King, and oh, let's see, there's the Change series by S.M. Sterling,
Haven't read
uh,
that.
the One
Oh.
Second After by William Fortune,
All right.
and a movie like Don't Look Up.
Yeah.
But
That's McKay, right? He's on Twitter now all the time on all of our threads.
oh, really?
Yes.
I
He's
didn't know that.
flipping out. He came back on and he's commenting every day. He's flipping out about society and what's happening. So he actually came back onto the cesspool of Twitter. But actually, our community is not a cesspool because we keep it's pretty good.
But the the scenarios portrayed in a lot of those fictional novels, for example, one thing is fairly clear that I think will happen is,
Yeah.
and because of COVID, there's most scenarios it would happen was you would get a supply chain disruption that would prevent people that are being kept alive with medications from
Oh,
surviving.
right.
And that would probably be the first wave of deaths. And it would be a significant one. And, most people can't envision the horror that will occur just with our population growth leveling off. Because, I just quoted you the figures from the last 5 years during COVID,
Right.
where, and, there was a huge loss of life. But imagine multiplying that loss of life by 20, 30, 40 times, and what that would do to healthcare systems, what it would do to supply chains. And, it would transcend more than just medications keeping people alive, but it would transcend food uh, and many other uh, societal norms that we take for granted on a daily basis. And so just leveling off
Yeah.
is a horror beyond our wildest dreams. And when we start down the backside of the population growth curve, it will, it's just beyond our imagination. And that's where some of the fictional novels come into play as far as,
Sure.
uh, you know, they're not that far out of the realm of possibilities. But in most cases, the fictional novels have some little small cadre of people that survive and, you know, live live on, and there's usually a semi-happy ending to many of the stories.
The hopium ending is right.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
I know.
but I've had conversations with a lot of people, and one of the other aspects of some of the books I've read that I find really interesting is the personality profiles of the people that rise to the top during a collapse. And I think we're starting to see it now. Uh, you know, you your little video about the autocrats taking over democracies, that is, I think, a function of collapse where psychopaths,
Yeah.
I think, will become increasingly take charge, at least on a temporary basis for a little while. And, you know, I, don't- I'm not, I'm somewhat apolitical, but, it seems to me that I know there's always been autocrats in the world. There's been Hitlers and Stalins and all those types of people, but it seems across the board there's more and more countries that are being run by psychopaths, and maybe I don't have a good handle on the politics of the world, but
Yeah.
it sure seems like there's more psychopaths gradually inserting themselves into positions of power now than there have been in the past.
And more people willing to give it up, willing to want to follow the leader because it's easier for them and they don't have to think. And there are these leaders all over the world are giving them the boogeyman. We're going to save you. We're going to take the boogeyman away. You won't have to worry about that anymore. And it's not just the United States with that. And you're right. I mean, I have that video. I wasn't going to show it unless you wanted me to, but it's just
No,
basically you just explained it. It's happening all over the country. I mean, all over the world.
right. And like with the Change series of S.M. Sterling,
Okay.
I'd always hope, because the personalities that rose to the top during collapse was a mixture of psychopaths and creative, caring people that had some serious muscle support. And I always hoped that would be the case. But, the more I see the world around me, the more I think that was probably a delusion on my part. And
No.
the creative, caring people are just going to get smushed, and the psychopaths will probably take over pretty much everywhere.
So, do you think there's a course on how to become a psychopath? Fit in? When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Oh my gosh. I
you
do.
know,
I honestly, what you're saying does it rings very true because we're living it and we're seeing it.
yeah, and the other thing that I've found is that as population density increases,
Hmm.
uh, people become more narcissistic. And I think part of it's maybe not even their fault, in that they're just overwhelmed by so much input from the world around them, with so many people in their sphere, that they start turning inward. It's almost a form of self-protection. And I've seen that my entire life, although it's just got worse and worse and worse. And I've known people that were very, very narcissistic from high population density areas.
Hmm.
And those were, there's always exceptions, but it seemed that was always been the case, but because the population density has got more and it's just higher all the time with more and more people. There's more and more people that have turned inwards, and that inwards turning
Hmm.
also results in them losing, uh, abandoning their curiosity, and they're unable to ask relevant questions. And so, what you said earlier is actually exactly true, where they just blindly follow people who give them, black and white answers, and they feel like they're part of something bigger.
Well, yeah, that's it's like the cult syndrome,
It is.
and that's what we're seeing, and we're seeing it more and more. I mean, but you see, these people are also couldn't be like Jim Jones. Will the people drink the Kool-Aid, like the old saying is? I know it's terrible, but is that Kool-Aid the defense mechanism, the protection? Maybe they all know, well, there's always that reward. For religious people, a reward is, or Christians, the reward is what? Heaven, and the reward is repenting and all of those things. I mean, do you see? Here's a question: do you see religion becoming more important and pronounced in the world right now?
I see it just kind of maintaining.
It
I
is.
don't really see any big drop off, but I don't see any real increase in religion. But, when it is really very cult like. I mean, all you have to do is look at India and all of these people. I mean, they know what the temperature is.
Right.
They're in it. And
Yeah.
yet they are, it's just so a part of their being that they feel that they have to, I'm not familiar with the religion. They're walking to a Mecca, aren't they?
No, well, that's Muslims from all over. It's Saudi Arabia hosted it. That's Muslims all over the world, and the where is it? I It was 1,100 people so far have died at the Hajj, and they do this. It's been going on for thousands and thousands of years, but it's never been hot, like this.
Right.
For a government like the Saudis to say, "Oh, don't come," you know, don't come. That wasn't said. That wasn't done. So because there's not an acceptance, there's not. But for Allah or for Jesus, people that follow, they will be taken through all of this. They have a spiritual power that's way higher than anything that you and I, we don't follow that, so we don't have that. We're not we're not following. We don't have that cushion. What is it? The soft landing of having an Allah or a Jesus
And when there's so many people that are so invested in
in it.
myths that they are willing to die for them. And you can see that whether it's for religious myths, for, people willing to die for their country, uh, and even here in the United States, think of the people that were part of the kind of the MAGA cult that got COVID and denied they had COVID with their dying breath, even though they died from COVID. And
Mm.
so they're so invested in their myths, they are willing to die for them. And that isn't anything new, but it's just a lot more prevalent today than it has been. And I think that prevalence is a function of population density.
Of course, too many people, so there's so many more people. We're just seeing it more. That and social media. Social media, the great, okay, I had a comment I wanted to find. Well, just somebody said, "Don't you think it's part of this rollover and play dead stuff is social media because, well, you can certainly say a lot on social media and then not have to even think about it in real life, on any situation. Any situation. All right. I'm going to bring up Gary because Gary is our spiritual person who has a beautiful spirituality. Lyle's making some good points. He is right. There are some good novels out there and not all hopium endings, just endings. The best focus on how we how we live in the predicament, not the outcome. I bet you and Gary would do a great show together. We have cultivated malignant narcissism and criminal sociopathy in our culture and leadership. That's at the core of ecocidal civilization. I've got to bring up his comments because they're so good. The biggest change in religion is that religions have become corporatized. Read The Divine Economy. Folk religion has been made into a religion of empires. Excellent points on all of it, Gary. Thank you. Do you have a comment for Gary?
Uh, Corporations are just another myth that, the greatest myth on the planet today is consumerism. And corporations are a huge part of that myth. And our the entire framework of human existence now is nothing but myths. We have an objective reality that supports us that we ignore, and that is oceans, forests, grasslands, wetlands,
Mm-hmm.
rivers,
Mm-hmm.
soils. And then we have all of these myths that completely consume 99% of the population, which is
Yes.
based on consumerism or religion or, uh, you know,
The
let's see,
hive mind. The hive mind, yeah.
and, and, but even our social our social beliefs, justice, all of these things are things that we created in the last 10,000 years that provide the framework for every aspect of our lives. And there's only very, very few people that spend any time understanding the objective reality that keeps them alive. And so um, people kind of dabble in it sometimes, but it's amazing now how many people are completely divorced from the things that allow them to persist. And for that reason, the why of our journalism 101 class is completely lost on people. They just don't have the capacity to understand climate change, carbon sequestration, and how that, how the emissions and the carbon sequestration fit together, how deforestation fits into climate change, how desertification fits into climate change, how deforestation fits into loss of biodiversity, or what they don't even know what biodiversity is. And so because we're so disconnected from the environment that supports our existence,
Mm-hmm.
there's no way that people can take ownership and even, I mean, you can't right the ship with 8 billion people, but you could probably at least slow down the sinking a little bit if people were a little bit more aware of the consequences of their actions. But people don't simply don't understand the how every action they take every day affects the habitability of the planet. And that was one of the points I tried to make in my book, uh, with the chapter on success, and just talking about why everything we do and how everything we do ends up, I mean, our conversation right now is
Mm-hmm.
killing wildlife somewhere. I mean, it took some mining and it took
Yep.
logging
Biggest
to,
hypocrite right here. I'll take the award for that.
the electronics that we're using to do this program,
Yep.
the tables that we've got for holding everything up or from wood. I
Plastic
mean,
pen. Everything.
everything. And so But if we were aware of the implications of our actions a little bit more and people were more cognizant of their effect on the planet, I think, we would at least be able to slow the process down a little bit. But with 8 billion people, we're just displacing too much. I mean, just for our simple necessities, the planet simply cannot, there's no way it could support 8 billion people. And frankly, it can't support even a tiny fraction of that.
People are skeptical too, though. They're skeptical of all the things they've been told. The whole recycling thing, the plastics thing. People are angry and they're turning off because they've been lied to so much about, oh, well, we're going to we're going to recycle all that plastic and it's not happening and everybody knows it's not happening. And then they see the videos of these dumps where plastic has been shipped. So there's a segment of people that are just saying, well, we're just being lied to. We're not going to listen to anything and nothing's true and nothing's real.
And they they have legitimate points. They have been lied
I'm
to.
one of those. Yeah.
I mean, I worked for agencies that lied to people on a regular basis. And there was no way to circumvent the lies. And the
That's heavy.
the me the major corporations
Hmm.
own the media. They control the narrative. And every day I have to listen, or not every day, but the timber companies have these commercials on television here in the
Oh.
Northwest about what great things they're doing for wildlife and fisheries and uh, with their logging. And
Mm.
it's just all a bunch of horseshit. And,
Sure it
it's
is.
it's gag worthy.
Just like the same thing around here, with I'm looking to see if I have these pictures, but I don't know if I can show you the picture that I got from Susan. It's just awful of everything being logged, for the solar park. And again, there's that segment of people, and I was talking to people like that are telling me, but we can't fight everything. We have to get off fossil fuels, so it's a scale. We'll ruin one thing to not ruin something else. Very sad. And I can't find the picture. I wish I could. I did not prepare well enough. But it's also really good to have a conversation just sometimes without all the bells and whistles. It's just good to talk, especially with someone like you who's been, your experience has been so different from so many of ours. Being out, I like to say, well, I live out here. I have my little land and I'm outside, but I'm living still a suburban, even though I'm rural. I might grow food and do it all, but I'm still using all of the fruits of the civilization that has to offer. There's no kidding anybody.
Well, I think it's impossible for people. Uh, I mean, I do too, and uh, it's impossible to live in modern society without using a lot
Right.
of the things that create the problems that we're having.
I have another thought that came through, and we see all of the horrors in Gaza and being brought onto those people. And you look at the devastation and you realize that's collapse and that's coming, but it may not be just in war form. But I think if people want to see a harbinger of the future, just look over there.
Yeah, uh, I think you're right. I mean, I think we're just going to start seeing more and more conflicts, and you know, there again, it comes back to the how and the
Yeah.
the tremendous amount of scenarios that could happen in terms of the how. I mean, obviously, Putin could uh, throw a nuke at somebody, and we could nuke ourselves to death. I mean, that conventional wars are another one. Uh, Gradual increases in climate change, infectious disease is another one that could raise us up.
Checklist.
So it's just, we just have many, many weak
Yeah.
links in our ecological chain now, and any of them could break, or several of them could partially break. I mean, there's just too many scenarios to come up with. But because because there's so many negative things that
Hmm.
we've piled up, it's like trying to juggle 20 balls in the air at the same time. Sooner or later, one of them's going to drop.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me bring up before you uh, go on a couple of comments. Sunflower skies. Anyone heard of the Hopi prophecy with environmental decline and rainbow people? I guess that may fall under myths. Just curious.
No, I haven't heard of that.
Right. Well, that's something to look into. It's interesting. Um, for Lyle, when roughly do you think collapse will reach the centers of power? Ooh, Tommyist.
Uh, I'm not exactly sure I understand the
Okay.
question.
Collapse. So governments, we have all these, we were talking about the governments around the world. Okay. They all are in the, you can, for shits and giggles, they're in the 1%. They have everything. Will it start affecting these government people and the hierarchy, the oligarchs?
Uh,
When?
I still think we're a little ways down the road from that.
Okay.
Uh, but I still don't, I don't think those oligarchs, they think they're protected by money, but at some point in time, money will become worthless. And whenever that happens, they're going down, and they're going down fast, because they've relied on other people for their existence their entire lives, and they're incapable of surviving what was going to come. And there will, I mean, that will be part of collapse when money is worthless.
And we'll all be on the same playing field.
Yep.
Well, it's going to level it out. It'll have to. But I see
Yep.
that's in that's not, I don't think it's going to be in my lifetime. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a prognosticator, because that goes back to my friends that'll say, "Come on, when?" And there's people that always say, "When?" And I don't have a crystal ball. Why would I be able to do that? I can't. Now, Nadia says, and thank you, Nadia. For colonized people, the collapse was when they were conquered. Example 1492 or shortly after for Native Americans. Collapse is unequally distributed. That's a great comment. That's actually completely spot on, Nadia. We'll thank her now. When religion failed at mass scale during the Black Death, a long-term loss of faith began that's still going on today. The scope, scale, and severity of faith's failures in true crisis dispel it well. Nadia always is phenomenal in her assessment of situations. Happy Pride! Vox Newsweek and Yahoo News just promoted KOSA afresh to ban trans people off the internet and imprison those caught getting on it anyway. Oh, lovely. So there's another collapse, of freedom at all. And I know the word has been co-opted by the right in the United States, freedom, but all that going backwards is a collapse to me of all of women's rights and pro-choice, all of it going backwards. That's collapsing in to me, part of it as a
And I
female.
and I guess I would argue that, I mean, you could make a case that collapse began 10,000 years ago with
Hmm.
when three things happened simultaneously. One was the advent of agriculture, which precipitated the advent of religions, the kind of religions that we have today, which precipitated patriarchy. And that's
Yeah.
when that was, that was like one of the stupidest things a species has ever done is they basically threw away half of its brains. I mean, by relegating women to inferior positions and having no say in everything that went on, we literally threw away half of our brains. And so, I would make the case that I don't really see that as part of collapse. I see it as a waypoint on our way to extinction, but it was a significant one.
Expound on that a little bit. The waypoint on the way.
Well, I think there's 7 or 8 waypoints that I see that were kind of critical on our path to where we are today.
All right, let's go.
One was just the anatomy and physiological changes was the first. The second was the use of fire. The third was our ability to imagine things that don't exist. And then the fourth was agriculture. And then the fifth was industrialization. The sixth was the advent of chemicals and plastics. And here we are at
Wow.
sitting on good old number 7.
Good old number 7. My God. And we can't even get the scientists to say we're in the Anthropocene. They want to hold on to the Holocene, the geologists. They don't want to go into they don't want to do it. Kicking and screaming. See, there's a human frailty. All right, Tommy, yes, he's giving you a question. I'm glad this is interactive with our wonderful chat tonight. Uh, all right, what do you think will cause human extinction? He just said it, basically. I mean, you really just did, but I mean, there's not one specific thing.
No,
No,
there's
no,
no way to predict.
no.
I gave kind of a laundry list of things that are, precipitating our collapse. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about, you know, where we've come from to get to the point we are today
All
and
right.
why we can't we can't turn the corner.
Well, then, I suppose we are at part 2 of the show tonight. Take it away,
Okay.
Lyle. Give me a great clip.
if if you find me squinting a little bit, my computer crashed right
Yeah, I
before we got
know.
on the program, and so I've got everything on my all my notes for this is on a screenshot on my telephone. So if you see me squinting, you'll know what it's all about.
Poor thing. Technical difficulties. Oh,
Technical
Jesus,
difficulties.
man. Okay, take it away.
Okay, so one of the old adages that I think is appropriate for what I want to discuss is if you don't know where you've come from, it's unlikely you're going to know where you're going. And so we get a huge amount of our information from where we came from paleontologists, anthropologists, archaeologists, and they're an interesting lot. There's climatologists, there's lots of disagreement among climatologists. Yes, there's a consensus that climate change is anthropogenic. You see the figures on social media every
Hmm.
day trying to convince the deniers that, and it's 98 or 99%. But within climatologists, there's there's a lot of disagreement about the extent and the causes and whether or not uh, it can be reversed or how it should be reversed or you know there's a million different opinions within the realm of climatology.
Yes.
And the same thing is true in wildlife biology. I facilitated conservation teams for years, and you get a bunch of biologists in a room, and nobody can
Oh
agree
my
on the best strategy for dealing with, trying to conserve a species. And everybody's got their own ideas, and nobody's, a lot of times, nobody's right or wrong, but, just trying to come up with some kind of a consensus strategy that people will accept is really like pulling teeth. The
That's
medical
interesting.
field is no different. I know people that have had diseases and injuries, and
Hmm.
it's why people go get second opinions. And, within the medical community, there's certain, oncologists that would treat cancer a certain way and others that wouldn't. And it goes on and on. And as part of the realm of the sciences that we regularly deal with, in that uh, there's a lot of art to it. It's not mathematics, it's not physics where there's an exact number that comes out the end of a pipe, and that it's not engineering, it's not geology. I mean,
Yeah.
there really is, a lot of times there's no answer, and trying to
Mm.
accept that is hard for people. But within all of those realms, the one that I found as a result of researching my book and trying to come up with kind of a history of where we've come from, the realm of paleontology may have more disagreement with it than any of the
Wow.
any of the climatologists, or, I mean,
It makes sense
and, and
though.
and when you think about it, I mean, there is the level of acceptance of error in paleontology. If you get within 100,000 years of a species being extinct that was alive a million years ago, that's pretty good. And think about it. If Think about all the times people have told me that I'm Ehrlich-like,
Oh
and he
gosh.
was wrong. He was wrong by 50 years, and yet paleontologists are dealing with an
Hundreds.
error
Right.
margin of sometimes 100 or 200,000 years
Thousand. Oh
in
my
terms
gosh.
of a species going extinct.
Isn't that interesting?
And
Yeah.
and so, but it also, I mean, all of us try to explain our, based on our own experiences and knowledge, we try to explain our lives, and we try to explain the world, try to rationalize the world around us. And paleontologists are no different. They're highly invested in what they do. But because there's so little information out there that transcends so many millions of years, there's some really interesting things that happens in the field of paleontology. Probably the greatest scientific fraud ever perpetuated was in the field of paleontology, and it occurred about a century ago, when in Europe they discovered the Piltdown man, and they also called it the Dawn man. And this was done by a
Oh my
solicitor.
god.
And the scientists back in the early 1900s were oftentimes doctors or lawyers or people that
Sure.
had the wherewithal to either look into botany or archaeology or paleontology. And so this solicitor, at the time, everybody thought that Europe, because it was so advanced, everybody, it's kind of like the United States today. They were
Yeah.
they thought they were the cat's meow, and everything
Wow. Yep.
started and ended in Europe. And so naturally, the evolution of humans had to have started in Europe. And so this solicitor, who was from Europe, uh, got a human skull and some teeth and a part of an orangutan skull, and buried them, and then in some place and then dug them up and used a file and stained
Oh
them and
shit.
did all this stuff and claimed he had discovered a Piltdown man.
Lovely.
And this was like in 1914. And for 40 years, this fraud was perpetuated. People, people didn't understand that men or that Homo sapiens evolved in Africa and
Right.
Asia
Right.
until the mid 50s. And so for 40 years, everybody thought that the missing link of human ancestry was in Europe and that it was this Piltdown man. And it took all of the, it took a lot of scientific detective work to finally put it into the fraud.
And of course, the
So that,
Piltdown man was white.
I don't think they didn't get into that much detail.
Oh.
But that kind of gives you, I've always, when I wrote my book, I, uh, I used the best research I had available at the time
Mm-hmm.
and wrote the chapter on the history of humans. And then it's like, after I finished the draft manuscript, about every month there would be a new article, refuting what the old article said. And then in another month later, there'd be another article refuting that
Well,
one.
that is scientific method. I mean, that is what happens. They piggyback off of their research, and that's why it keeps going. That's why there's debate, as Jim Massa says.
But with paleontology,
Mm.
they're covering so much ground with so little information that they're making judgments that, sometimes change by 180 degrees. And like what happened with the fraud, there's fraud in, that
That's human nature.
paleontologists, yeah, that's just human nature. Paleontologists are no different than anybody else. And there's always going to be somebody that, you know, creates a bad name, but that's just that's just kind of the way it is. But what I found is that, based on a very little bit of information, they make some very detailed uh, assessments of how humans lived historically.
Okay.
And sometimes they're right, but I've also found that many times, I haven't found personally. I'm not a paleontology, but based on my knowledge of ecology,
Mm-hmm.
I and I'm going to explain that as I go. I would question a lot of their findings. So I finished my first draft of my manuscript in September of 2021, and I talked to a publishing consultant because I knew nothing about it, and they advised me to seek out a publisher. And so I went through the whole process and shipped it off to publishers. And then, you sit on your heels for 6 months to a year waiting to
Oh,
hear back whether they accept your manuscript. And in that time, they also told me I needed to establish a social media presence. And so I got on Twitter for the first time
yeah,
in
you
like
did.
it was March or April of 2022. And fortuitously, I ran into Julian Cribb, who's an
Oh,
author
yeah.
from Australia. And we got to sending messages back and forth. And one of the questions that I had after I finished my book was what that I was never able to find a good answer for was what precipitated humans from moving out of Afro-Asia. And, you know, it was
Wow.
about 60 to 80,000 years ago, they moved into Australia and Europe. And then, roughly 20,000 years ago, they moved into the Americas. And there was never any good answers for what precipitated them moving uh, out of Africa and Asia. So as I usually do, I developed a theory and ran it by
Good.
Julian, and he also had archaeology background before he got into writing and newspapers and all of that kind of thing. And he poked a bunch of holes in my theory, and he had his own theory, and I wasn't any more impressed with his theory as I was my theory. And but in the course of that exchange, he sent me a, a research paper on what some of the sites that had been occupied by ancient humans between about 1.5 and 2.3 million years ago. And because at the time I didn't even realize that there was humans in southern Asia over 2 million years ago. And so I was still pondering, what made them move. And I finally decided the best thing to do was to find the sites on Google Earth and
No
see
shit.
what I could come up with
Yeah.
based on, all of the time I've spent in the backcountry and the wilderness trying to figure out how they lived and what they were doing to survive at those places for, in some cases, it was, well over 100,000 years. And it was it was an eye-opening experience because almost all of those sites, I mean, there was Olduvai Gorge, Sturkfontein, Wonderwork Cave, Lascaux Cave, all of these, pretty famous anthropo or paleontological sites were all close to big lakes,
Sure.
rivers, oceans, and
Fresh.
that drove home the whole how important shallow water, shallow freshwater aquatic habitats were to our early persistence. Well, paleontologists, they're finding these bones in caves, and in the paleontological world, it's a lot easier to find a bone of a big mammal than it is a small mammal because they just hold up better. I mean,
Sure.
it's really pretty simple. And so when it comes to finding things, they're it's a very biased process. And so, they
Interesting.
find these bones with cut marks on them from 2.5 million years ago or whatever, and they leap to the conclusion that they were these great white hunters that were out there hunting big game, over 2 million years ago, and and they further made the assessment that because of our bipedalism that had evolved over like between 2 and 4 million years ago, and our diaphragm developing like it does, and our ability to run long distances, that we were running down these antelope across the savannah and just by simple persistence, and then killing them, and that's how we survived. And after I looked at the Google Earth, I knew that was bullshit.
Wow. Wow.
and and there's another
Very
reason why
interesting.
it and I tried to write my prologue in my book to reflect that.
Yeah.
It was a small group of hominids 1.5 million years ago that lived above a river that was close to a lake. And I think we were very much tied to water, and for several reasons.
Yeah.
One is I mean, the amount of biodiversity that is near water is extraordinary. And, I mean, if I was going to try to live off the land, you almost have to have some kind of quality, uh, biodiverse, shallow water aquatic habitats. And, for some of those sites, it was where a river was coming into the ocean. So they had the best of saltwater habitat, shallow water habitats, and freshwater habitats. And, you know, you have many more birds along water, in areas with
Yeah.
water, along rivers and streams and
Makes
wetlands.
sense.
You've got amphibians and frogs and salamanders. And if you were a hunter gatherer trying to make a living off the land, that's where you're going to get the most bang for the buck. And that's exactly what they were doing. And yeah, they may have occasionally shot or, hunted down a big game animal, but those were far and few in between, and was likely most of the time what I would call aggressive scavenging,
Ooh.
where they drove animals off of kills and stole it. And so that was part of the eye opener for me with some of the paleontology things. And the other part is, as our brain grew larger, and I can't remember, Australopithecus, I think, had brain size of about 500 cubic centimeters, and gradually, between Homo habilis and Homo erectus, and finally Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, it it got up to like 1,500 cubic centimeters. I think Neanderthals had the highest brain capacity of
The big
all of the
brain.
Homo sapiens,
Hmm.
and or Homo species, and since that time, our brains have shrunk by about 15% over the last 20,000 years, just probably precipitated a lot by agricultural and industrial activities. But uh,
Oh,
but most people know that about 20% of our caloric intake is feeds our brains.
sure.
It Brains require a much higher metabolism than other mammals our size with smaller brains. But what the paleontologists also forget is that with a higher metabolism also comes a greater need for frequent and more water, because, you know,
Hmm.
we use it to thermoregulate, we use it to hydrate, for waste removal. It it's part of who we are, and it ties us really closely to water. So the whole premise of us, you know, going on these marathon runs across the savannah, or chasing these big game animals with spears, and we romanticize this bullshit
Like,
no end.
like it's a fantasy. Like, yeah, like the Flintstones really did not exist.
Yeah. The reality was, we were hanging out around rivers and
Right,
streams and
right.
wetlands and ponds and springs and
Well, of
and
course that makes sense. Of course it does. Water is life. Indigenous people know that.
that's right. And so it finally kind of dawned on me that I think from Africa, they just kind of followed the ocean around. Some of the oldest sites in Asia were just along the ocean. And so the earliest Homo sapiens that moved from Africa into Asia just followed the shoreline of the ocean until they found a good place to live. But I think for all of our existence, we were, very closely tied to water, and we had to be, just from a metabolic standpoint.
Okay.
And so when we get into these collapse scenarios, a lot of people believe that we can, uh, that there's going to be some little band of humans that survive collapse, and that we're going to go back to our hunter gatherer
Yeah, oh
days.
yeah,
We're
that's a common one. Hmm.
and that we're going to persist. And nothing could be further from the truth. There's no habitat on our planet that is more degraded than shallow fresh and saltwater habitats.
Absolutely.
The I've seen
Yeah.
the estimates are that we've lost about 70% of all wildlife in the last 50 to 60 years. But I've seen estimates of 85% of the biodiversity and abundance of wildlife along shallow freshwater
Water.
habitats. And so, uh, you know, what we've lost in the very habitats that would most be needed for our survival, it just isn't happening. They're either, they're warmed up because of climate change. They're the they're the funnel for the whole area for where toxins and sediment from grazing and logging and
Everything.
uh, everything. I
Yeah,
mean,
and when you are putting pipelines in, or you have to do the environmental assessment, I think lots of corners are cut and cheated. It sounds, and I hate to be so skeptical about it, but you're laying out, the results.
yeah, and civilizations have always been tied to water. I mean, look at all of this big cities or even little cities and towns. Almost all of them are sitting on some kind of a water source,
Hmm.
and as a result, those those areas are the ones most polluted. And during a collapse,
Uh,
there's no way you could survive. I mean, they're so germ ridden. I mean, the coliforms are incredibly high. The amount of heavy metals,
you
the
mean my
micro.
life straw isn't going to save us? Come on.
it, might, it might help for a little while, but it isn't unless your life straw has a lifetime warranty guaranteed. I
Well,
think
we'll
you
send
might
it
be in
back if it
trouble.
doesn't work. I'm sorry. I don't know. It's Friday night. Oh, boy.
So the other aspect of the whole business is the people that think that this little group of hunter gatherers are going to
Yeah.
persist are going to learn from history and not repeat it. And there's absolutely no indication in our entire human
Uh-uh.
history that we will learn from it. And yeah, maybe for a generation or two that they would remember what happened. But, I just some of the look at all of the civilizations of the last 5,000 years.
Right.
There are uh, Mesopotamia and, oh gosh, the Mayan
Mm-hmm.
civilization were thought to have been collapsed because of deforestation. But look at what we're doing to the entire planet. We just can't help ourselves. Easter Island is another one where they completely denuded the planet with deforestation. And, from what I heard, they became cannibals and,
Yeah,
uh,
there's a couple of different Easter Island theories, but that is one of them. Absolutely. They
and so,
fouled the nest. I mean, it's as simple as that.
yeah. But evolution doesn't allow us to go back. It just, evolution wants a species to survive, reproduce, and grow. And that's what we do. And that's what all species do. But we're the only ones that evolved with bipedal capabilities and shoulders that allowed us to throw. And so we're the only species known that is precipitating a mass extinction event, that we will eventually become one of the victims.
Hmm.
And that's why I'm the doomerist doomer,
But you
because
are a boomer
I
based
don't,
in reality.
I hope so. I mean, I try to, it's not, I mean, obviously, I would prefer humans to persist forever and, biodiversity to expand and be, we all have our dreams, but the reality is we are who we are. We've done what we've done,
Right.
and we're going to continue to do what we've done, and we're going to disappear.
Well, I don't see any. I mean, here's my doomer. I don't see any indication that anyone is stopping anything. They're upgrading nuclear weapons, which is another thing. Radiation. Once radiation is entered into the equation in the water, that is game over. Game over. And that's
Yeah,
all over. That's all over. So, so yes, it's collapse acceptance.
it's collapse acceptance, but for many people, collapse acceptance is the scenario where there's this little band of hunter gatherers that persist forever,
And you just laid
and
out why. You just laid it right out. You just told us why it isn't going to happen. And you gave us a theory. And now let's see what happens as a result of this conversation. And if there's somebody that decides they want to come on and try to refute what you've said, that would be quite interesting. You know,
hmm
some
yeah,
paleontologist out there, hello, come in and we'll have this discussion. But how does it not make sense? What you just laid out, how does that, anybody in the chat, can you tell me how that does not make sense? I don't
I wish
know.
it didn't.
No, I wish it didn't either, but it's funny. I didn't have to go through all of the paleontological records to come to similar conclusion. And I suppose that may be because of all the different people that I talk with and interview and read and do. Jim's always talking about the oceans and how we're basically have ruined the oceans, and the problems are they're becoming insurmountable.
hmm
They are. But we live today. And that's why I constantly say, well, I'm an activist and we're going to we are working to try to keep the water here clean. That's a big thing here for us. Not use sludge from fracking from Pennsylvania on the farms for whatever stupid reason that was brought in, or on the roads. There's the small things to make life better while we're on the slide down. And we all know it. Here, anyway.
Absolutely. I mean,
Here, anyway.
have the utmost respect for people that are trying to do what they can for as long as they can.
And there's amazing people I've surrounded myself with, in real life that feel that way.
I
And
know. I've met some incredible people on X that, in their own way, everybody has their own niche, and there's obviously many more niches to fill than we have the people to fill them in terms of things that, we could do that were positive, but they're doing some incredible things.
yeah, and it's a local thing. I mean, the more you think about the big picture, the more your own thermal inertia. That's one of Jim's favorite words about the ocean, Jim Massa, thermal inertia. Well, the more you think about the big stuff that we have no control over, you're in your own private Idaho, baby. You're in your own thermal inertia. It ain't gonna happen. But you don't shit where you eat. So if you live somewhere and you feel that there is one little bit of a chance that maybe you could prevent something, like Susan, who tried very hard to bring up all of this with that solar farm, all of the different negative things that were going to happen as a result. She lost, but she tried, you know. She tried. And that's what you can do instead of giving up, even with collapse acceptance.
Yep.
I don't see you gave up. I see you wrote a book and you're trying to educate and you wanted to come on here and talk to people. I think it's wonderful. Alex, big picture, night and day. Yeah. The big picture is hard. Sometimes it's overwhelming, but not the small one. Even if it is your own yard. Even if it is letting the grass grow and only having pathways. I mean, it might make me feel better for a little while. Anyway, 10 minutes I didn't run over the snakes. We have lots of them, you know, but still. And
Yep.
we do. What are you thinking out there, guys? Uh, all right. Nadia had another comment, and also the runoff from factory farms, urine ponds, and feces dumps basically get toxic and swamps in shallow water. Yeah, like in North Carolina. Never mind where they aerosolize the feces and coat everything in a large radius with it. Oh yes, we just have the most upbeat chat. I mean, but what is wrong? There's nothing wrong with what she just said. And here's a question, and I touched on it. Dawn Bledsoe, given how long the radioactivity will last, do you think humans could outlive a nuclear bomb? Well, we've seen life come back to Chernobyl, but in what capacity? That's a very we can't answer that question. Can you?
Well, it's the trouble is it's more than just a nuclear bomb. I mean, there's no just one. That's the problem we're in. Is there's no one insult to the planet that we've created. Yeah, there's the whole nuclear issue, but climate change isn't going away. Chemical toxins aren't going away. The loss of biodiversity isn't going away. The infectious disease isn't going away.
Yeah,
And so
the
there,
checklist.
you just can't look at any one thing in a silo and come up with the answer because they're all interrelated and interdependent.
Absolutely. And I think that your checklist idea could be an actually really intense video. I've already got the idea of putting something together. Lyle's checklist of seven. I don't know if I would call it that, but yeah, Alex, polycrisis city.
Yep.
Polycrisis. That's a word that has been bandied about lately. Polycrisis. Um, Hi, James. All right, so here they banned weed killer. Finally, government agencies were using it to spray around areas that were hard to get to. Not anymore. That is a plus. So, see, it's those kinds of things, you know, that just make where you are just a little bit better. That made me happy. And I know the big picture, but that made me happy. So, thanks for sharing that. And Groove Dragon, hemp can make 250,000 different products. If that could ever happen. That's another thing. Can these things absolutely happen or not? It's in capitalism. Maybe, hemp companies, I see it, it's happening now with the medical, but the medical hemp is the most plastic centered industry. Do you know anything about that, Lyle? Everybody wanted cannabis legal, and it's just absolutely hideous. Hideous. It's all
You know,
plastic.
you know, man, plastic, I really think plastic could be just as dangerous as climate change.
It is. People are
Yeah.
starting to understand that. Even people, just the layperson, farmers around here who are reading about this, not all of them, I'm talking about the savvy people that, have open minds, understand this. And when Jane Dees was Von Dees was with me, Dr.
Hmm.
Jane, and she talked about the medical industry and the plastic that's the single-use plastic, which is like the cannabis industry. We are going to drown in plastic eventually.
Yeah,
And it's
Jane is
already in
one of
our way.
the,
Is she wonderful?
yeah, she's one of my heroes in the medical field. I mean, she's doing all she can in a field that generates a huge amount of fossil fuels and plastic, and she's
Yep.
very aware. And
Yes, she
uh,
is. Guys, if you
uh,
haven't seen my interview with Jane, I'll put a link in these show notes. It was wonderful, and it did not get enough views, in my opinion. And it was a great discussion. So yeah, but
absolutely.
Chaz says, "Yep, we ingest one credit card of plastic every week." That's the conventional wisdom out there, I suppose. That's what the media was telling us, but we really don't know for sure. We just are. I mean, these scientists now that are studying the plastics are just tipping the iceberg. It's not just what we see floating on the top. We hear about the microplastics, but then there's another bit of denial in that also. Out of sight, out of mind.
And actually, that research came out of Australia in 2019 because I included it in my book. And the amount of plastic in the environment now compared to 2019, I mean, that's another half a decade. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're ingesting a, up to 2 credit cards of plastic a week by now. I mean, that's how
Oh God.
fast things are going. And so I always recommend I
Thank you,
always
Dan.
recommend people with
Yeah.
curry on their plastic dishes.
Why is put curry on your plastic dish? Does it break down something faster?
More edible.
It's more edible. curry and
Taste
curry and
Curry
plastic.
tastes better. What
Yeah.
goes down
So
better with
I
curry.
try now. I try now so hard to use things that are not plastic, but you never know. Then they're going to find something that was baked into the ceramic. It's probably plastic. Shit. See, we're fucked. All right, sorry. There I said it. There I
Thanks for
said
the
it.
compliment on my book too.
Yeah,
Someone
Dan,
just said,
thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much. So much. James, it's not a drug, okay? It is an herb and has been used as medicine for millions of years that cut into pharmacies' opium sales to women for pain. Yeah. And now it's just a big way for the plastic industry to sell more plastic. It is. They should have just said, hey, give people seeds and let them grow their own. If they want pain relief, grow it yourself. That'll help you get better. I do it. So, all right. So where are we? We have been an hour and 28 minutes. I think that we've covered a lot of territory. Wow. Go ahead, Lyle. Do you want to do my Oh, we didn't do a flush of the day. If we were going to do an environmental coffee house flush of the day, what would we flush away? Paleontologists?
you
No.
know, I love paleontologists.
I
I don't
know.
want to give the impression that
No, I'm
because
teasing.
they've provided some incredible insights, uh,
Okay.
and and so
We won't
you know
flush them.
they're just dealing with a different world than we are, and they're doing the best. Most of them are doing the best they can. Obviously, there's always
The
the bad
outlier.
apple, and
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's true in biologists or anything else.
Yeah. Let them go over to the Heartland Institute. Okay. So we're going to flush away plastic. We hate it. We all love to hate plastic now. So goodbye. And see, water is life. And that is why we flush things away. Although this flush goes to a septic, the water gets reused and it's repurposed. I like to tell myself that too. Oh, yes. I have a septic, so I know that the water isn't just going somewhere else. It's just coming back. What goes around comes around. All right, let's see, guys. Oh boy, there's a lot of conversation going on out there. Um, okay, wait. It's not. I know they're having a solar farm. Flush false choices. It's not solar farms. It's profiteering. That's the problem. Well, you have a point, of course, Karen. Karen's been a guest on our show. She's a very fascinating person. Um, how come more evolutionary biologists are not writing books like yours, Lyle? Hmm. Maybe because
You
Lyle
know,
said it all.
I was in a unique position, just working in a I worked in a regulatory environment for 11 years and for a habitat agency for 22 years. And so I was really working at the interface of research and bureaucracies and politics and that's kind of where the action is. And for most people, it's very intimidating. It's chaotic, and it results in a lot of uh, just personal attacks, professional attacks. I It's not an easy position to be in, and most
Yeah.
people are bullied into silence. And for that reason, or they become quasi uh, cultists,
Mm.
where they adopt the agency culture, and they can't see that what they're doing is any. I mean, they're patting themselves on the back, congratulating themselves on all the good things they're doing as the world crumbles around them. And so it's a
Isn't that the truth?
there's very few people that can take the kind of
Beating up you get?
beating up. I
Abuse.
was pummeled
Pummeled? Beat the
my
shit out
entire
of? Yeah.
career.
Oh, because you were right. That's why. All right,
Well,
I've
it's
got
hard to.
something. I've got another one. All right, Tommyist, you're so wonderful. Optimists think human intelligence and adaptability will help us find a way out. Do you think our intelligence will be more of a liability or asset regarding long-term survival? And you were touching upon that when we were talking about the Australopithecus. I can't even say it. The brain sizes of all the different species types of humans that we evolved into it. Now we're shrinking. What do
And
you
I
think?
guess I just don't see us as all that much of an intelligent species. I mean, I wrote an entire chapter in my book
Yeah, you did.
addressing that and
You did.
explaining why. And if you're the species that defines intelligence, you're going to be intelligent. I mean, if the species that create intelligence, you're going to be intelligent. If you're the individual who defines intelligent, you're going to be intelligent. And that's basically
Ah.
what we've done. And,
Ah.
the more you understand other species and how they have adapted and the mechanisms they use to survive in their niche, the more respect I have for the other organisms that share our planet with us. And by the time I finished researching and writing my book, I felt like a dummy. And I think Homo sapiens is just a very average species, nothing special.
It's not hard to understand that, but we the there's people that will say, well, no, humans are best. We have dominion over the earth. That's what every religion tells. We have dominion over the species. Everything was created for us. We are very centered, self-centered. So, yeah.
And really, if you look at that in an evolutionary sense, it's a huge disadvantage. I mean, because we perceive us as intelligent and that we've made everything better, but we've done so for 200 years. I mean, really, the advent of us being what we consider, the superior species was when we were able to get child mortality under control. And, uh, 200 years evolutionarily is nothing. I mean, it's absolutely nothing. And in fact, our entire existence from breaking off from the great apes 6 million years ago in an
Yeah.
evolutionary context is, 1% of the life of complex life on the planet. I mean, it's just not that much. And so, but we inflate our importance and what we've done in order to make our lives seem important. And I've often wondered whether species that are in a growth, you know, whether it's exponential or greatly accelerating growth phase, all do that because they all use,
Yes.
and then collapse. And,
Wow.
you've seen it with you can see it with
Sure.
other species.
Yep.
But we're the only species that has done that at a much, the scale is so much greater for us that the collapse is likely to be much more horrific.
It is horrific, actually. It's going on. I just watched something the other day. I don't have the name of it. I'll find it and put it in the notes. It was a piece and it was talking about extinction. It was overpopulation and extinction, but I can't even watch these pieces that show all of the different animals that have gone extinct, not because of themselves, but because of what we've done. It's too painful. Sometimes it's just too painful. Sometimes I don't want to feel the pain. I want to hide. I want to hide, but I know what's real. I mean, I do this channel. You can't really hide when you're doing what I do.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
And really, I think it's hundreds of thousands of species we've already ushered to their demise.
Hundreds of thousands. Hey, by the way, it's good to see you, Trev. Love the evolutionary references. Fellow gardener. Yes, for sure. Tomato man extraordinaire. But he's a giver. He's definitely a giver up there, and he's in Canada. All right, guys, I think that we have definitely had some show and conversation. And I want to thank the folks out there watching on Twitter X, because I know there's a bunch of you. And whoever might be watching on Twitch, because I don't think there is, and Facebook, um, and of course, YouTube. So I'm going to let you have the last word, Lyle. And you'll probably come back. I like this. And you challenge my pea brain to keep thinking. My ever shrinking elderly brain, who has to bring a sense of humor to all of these very really difficult, tragic conversations. Actually,
Yeah, and I guess if what I would say is a sense of humor is so important to maintaining my sanity and my insanity. Probably both.
you got a great smile too. We like it. We absolutely like it. Well, I want to thank everybody. Lyle, you will come back. And I said, I was joking with Lyle, guys, that he might come back and if he becomes part of the team, we're just going to have to put his face in the header. Just have to change the header and add him in. We're quite a team, though. And I also have to give a shout out to Brett, who takes care of the Discord. He's done a phenomenal job. People converse there all day long. It's there's a million different topics you can converse there and a million different things. It's a software program called Discord. So maybe I'll put the invite for those of you who may not be. And thank you everyone. I'll start our little bit of our ending music. Yeah. So it's what, Friday? I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Lyle, it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
As
Happy
always.
solstice.
Oh, yes, we didn't even say anything. I've been having happy rainstorms, thunder, lightning, water like crazy. Oh, yeah. And heat. Heat. All right, guys. All right, it's been fantastic. Bye. Peace. Mwah. Love you all. Absolutely.